Captain Alex Reed stared at the holographic display showing the Outer Rim territories, his jaw clenched in frustration. The U's Resilience floated in the darkness of space, its hull patched with alien metal that didn't quite match the original. Human construction. Around him, his crew of 12 worked at stations that hummed with salvage technology from a dozen different species. They were the best humanity had to offer, yet they were stuck monitoring empty trade routes that no other species considered worth their time. "Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission from Coalition Command," announced Communications Officer Lisa Martinez, her fingers dancing across the alien interface that had taken her months to master. The device was originally designed for the six-armed Korathi, making it awkward for human hands to operate. Reed straightened in his command chair, hoping for something more interesting than another cargo inspection. "Put it through." The image that appeared was of High Commander Veltorek, a towering Korathi whose crystalline exoskeleton reflected the light in rainbow patterns. His multiple eyes regarded Reed with barely concealed disdain. "Human vessel Resilience, you are being assigned to investigate a distress signal from the Kepler system. The signal is weak and likely automated, but Coalition protocol requires investigation." Reed felt his heart sink. Another meaningless assignment while the real action happened elsewhere. "Understood, Commander." "What's the nature of the distress signal?" "Unknown origin, unknown language. The signal began transmitting 3 days ago and has been repeating the same message. Since the Kepler system was abandoned centuries ago, it's likely just malfunctioning equipment." Veltorek's voice carried the tone of someone explaining something to a child. "This assignment should be well within human capabilities." The transmission ended, leaving Reed staring at the empty screen. Around him, his crew exchanged glances. They all knew what those words meant. The Coalition was sending them because they expected nothing dangerous, and if there was danger, humanity's loss wouldn't matter much. "Set course for the Kepler system," Reed ordered, trying to keep the bitterness from his voice. "Maximum safe speed." Engineer Tom Bradley looked up from his station, his weathered face showing concern. "Captain, that's a 3-day journey at best. Our fusion drive is still running at 60% efficiency since the last repair." "Then we'll take 4 days if we have to," Reed replied. "At least it's something different than watching empty space." The Resilience turned toward the Kepler system, its engines leaving a faint blue trail in the darkness. Reed watched the stars shift on the view screen and wondered, not for the first time, what humanity was really doing out here. They had been part of the Galactic Coalition for 2 centuries, but they still felt like unwelcome guests at someone else's party. The other species had evolved incredible abilities over millions of years. The Korathi could deflect energy weapons with their crystalline skin and process information at speeds that made human computers look slow. The Veltar could phase through solid matter, making them perfect for infiltration and exploration. The mighty Drakmor shared a telepathic network that let them coordinate perfectly in battle. Moving like a single organism with thousands of bodies, humans had none of these advantages. They were fragile, short-lived, and had no natural abilities beyond stubborn determination and an annoying tendency to survive things that should have killed them. In the Coalition's grand hierarchy, they ranked somewhere between a useful tool and a minor annoyance. 3 days later, the Resilience dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system. The sensors immediately detected the source of the distress signal, a massive space station orbiting the dead world of Kepler-7. The station was unlike anything in Coalition databases, its architecture flowing and organic in ways that seemed to defy physics. "My God," whispered Science Officer Dr. Emma Walsh, her eyes wide as she studied the readings. "Captain, this station is old. Really old. The metal composition suggests it's been here for at least 50,000 years, maybe longer." Reed leaned forward, studying the strange structure on the main screen. The station was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, with spiraling towers that seemed to grow from its surface like crystalline trees. "Any signs of life?" "Negative, sir, but there's something else. The station is generating a containment field of some kind. It's using technology I've never seen before, and it's drawing Power from the system star through some kind of quantum tap. A 50,000-year-old station with active technology? Reed felt a chill run down his spine. Contact Coalition Command. They need to know about this. Martinez worked at her console for several minutes before shaking her head. I can't get through, Captain. Something about the station is interfering with our communications. We're on our own until we move away from it. Reed considered their options. Standard procedure would be to withdraw and wait for reinforcements, but that could take weeks. The station was clearly important, and if they left now, the Coalition would probably send a Korathi science vessel to claim the discovery. Humanity would get a footnote in the report at best. Prepare an away team, Reed decided. We're going aboard. Bradley looked concerned. Captain, that might not be wise. We don't know what we're dealing with. We never do, Reed replied. That's what makes us human. An hour later, Reed led a team of 6 through the station's docking bay. The artificial gravity was slightly stronger than Earth normal, and the air had a metallic taste that made breathing unpleasant. The corridors were designed for beings taller than humans, with curved walls that seemed to flow like water that had been frozen. Mid-dash motion. The away team moved carefully through the empty halls, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Emergency. Lighting cast strange shadows that made familiar shapes look threatening. As they went deeper into the station, they began to find signs of its former inhabitants. The first chamber they entered was clearly a laboratory, filled with equipment that defied easy description. Crystalline structures grew from the walls, pulsing with faint light. In the center of the room stood a massive device that looked like a cross between a telescope and a weapon. Captain, Walsh called from across the room, you need to see this. Reed joined her at what appeared to be a control console. The surface was covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in more dimensions than human eyes could process. But surrounding the console were other symbols, carved hastily into the metal in dozens of different languages. These are warnings, Walsh said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can read some of them. Korathi, Veltar, Drakmor, and at least 20 other languages. They all say the same thing. The Devourers must never wake. Reed felt ice form in his stomach. How old are these warnings? That's the thing, Captain. They're not all the same age. Some are ancient, but others are relatively recent. The newest ones are maybe 1,000 years old. It's like different species have been finding this place for millennia, and they all left the same message. A low rumble shook the station, and the lights flickered. In the distance, something that might have been an alarm began to sound. Reed looked at his team, seeing his own fear reflected in their faces. We need to get out of here, he said. Whatever this place is, we've triggered something by coming aboard. But as they turned to leave, the symbols on the console began to glow brighter. The crystalline structures in the walls pulsed faster, and the air itself seemed to thicken. Something was waking up. Something that had been sleeping for thousands of years, and humanity was about to meet their first devourer. The corridor filled with a sound like breaking glass mixed with screaming wind. Reed felt his teeth ache as the noise penetrated his skull, and around him, his team pressed their hands to their ears. The crystalline structures in the walls began to crack, releasing streams of silver light that moved like living things. Captain, we need to move now, Bradley shouted over the growing din. The station's power systems are overloading. Reed was about to agree when the far wall simply dissolved. Not melted or broken, but dissolved like sugar in water. Through the opening flowed something that his mind refused to process properly. It was darkness that moved with purpose, shadow that had weight and hunger. The thing that emerged stood, roughly human-sized but seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. The Devourer fixed its attention on the nearest human. Security Officer Mike Chun. Chun raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the creature reached out with appendages that might have been arms. The touch wasn't physical, Reed realized with growing horror. It was reaching directly into Chun's mind. Chun's scream cut through the station's alarms. His body went rigid, his eyes rolling back to show only white. But instead of the quick death Reed expected, something else happened. Chun's body began to shake, his muscles tensing and relaxing in rapid succession. The devourer pulled back, its form wavering with what might have been confusion. "What the hell?" Walsh whispered, her scientific mind trying to process what she was seeing. "It's not working properly." The devourer tried again, its shadowy form pressing closer to Chun. This time Chun's response was different. His eyes snapped open, blazing with an intensity Reed had never seen before. The security officer's hand moved to his sidearm, and he fired 3 shots directly into the creature's center mass. The energy bolts passed through the devourer without effect. But something else happened. The creature recoiled as if struck, its form becoming less solid. Chin was on his feet now, his weapon trained on the thing that had tried to consume him. "It can't hold on," Chun said, his voice strained but clear. "My mind, it's too messy, too chaotic, it's slipping." Reed's training kicked in. "Everyone back to the ship, now." The team retreated through the station's corridors while the devourer followed, its movements becoming more erratic. It would reach for one of them, make contact, then pull back in what looked like pain or confusion. By the time they reached the docking bay, the creature had stopped pursuing them altogether. Back aboard the Resilience, Dr. Walsh ran every medical scan she could think of on Chun. The results were disturbing in their normalcy. "He's fine," she reported to Reed in his ready room. "Better than fine, actually. His neural activity is more organized than I've ever seen it. It's like that thing tried to eat his consciousness and got indigestion." Reed paced behind his desk, trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. "What exactly did you see when it touched you?" Chun sat in the chair across from Reed, his hands steady despite what he had endured. "It was trying to map my thoughts, Captain. Like it was following pathways in my brain. But human thoughts don't work that way. We jump around, we contradict ourselves, we feel things that don't make logical sense." The creature kept getting lost. "It was trying to consume his consciousness," Walsh added. "But human consciousness isn't like other species. We're not organized or efficient. We're chaotic, emotional, and unpredictable. The devourer's feeding process depends on being able to follow logical thought patterns. It can't handle our mental chaos." Reed felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. "Doctor, you're saying that our weakness is actually a strength against this thing?" "Not just a strength, Captain. It might be the only defense in the galaxy. Think about it. The Korathi have crystalline minds that process information in perfect logical sequences. The Veltar consciousness exists in ordered quantum states. The Drakmor share a telepathic network that's completely synchronized. Any of those species would be easy prey for something that feeds on consciousness." The implications were staggering. Reed returned to his command chair and stared at the ancient station on the view screen. "We need to go back." "Sir?" Bradley looked alarmed. "With respect, that seems like a very bad idea. We need to understand what we're dealing with. If there are more of these things, the Coalition needs to know." Reed made his decision. "Chun, you're with me. The rest of you stay here and try to re-establish communications with Command." This time, Reed and Chun approached the station with different equipment. Instead of weapons, they carried recording devices and sensors. The corridors were silent now, but the damage from the devourer's awakening was evident everywhere. Walls had been torn open and the crystalline structures lay shattered on the floor. They found the creature in what appeared to be a vast chamber deep in the station's core. It was huddled in a corner, its form flickering between solid and translucent. As they approached, Reed realized the devourer was injured in some way that defied physical understanding. "It's hurt," Chun observed, his voice showing no sympathy. "Whatever it did to itself trying to eat my thoughts, it backfired." The chamber was filled with more of the warning symbols, but these were different. They were older, carved into the walls themselves rather than hastily scratched into surfaces. As Reed studied them, he began to understand the station's purpose. "This isn't just a prison," he said. "It's a research facility. The beings who built this place, they were studying the devourers, trying to understand them. They found the archive. In an adjacent chamber, vast crystalline matrices that stored information in formats that human technology could barely read. But what they could access painted a picture of galactic horror that made Reed's blood run cold. The Devourers were not from this galaxy. They were refugees from a consumed reality, beings that had already devoured entire galactic clusters beyond the known universe. They fed on consciousness itself, converting other sentient species into more of their kind. Each feeding made them stronger, smarter, more numerous. The ancient civilization that had built this station, the architects, had been the first to understand the true nature of the threat. They had sacrificed themselves to create a dimensional prison, trapping the Devourers in spaces between realities. But the seals were failing, and the creatures were beginning to break free. "Captain," Chen said, his voice tight with fear, "look." At this, the final records showed breach points throughout the galaxy, places where the dimensional barriers were weakest. The devourer they had encountered was just a scout, one of dozens that had already escaped. The main swarm was still trapped, but not for much longer. Reed felt the weight of the galaxy settling on his shoulders. "We need to get this information to the Coalition immediately." They left the station with their recordings and data, but as the Resilience jumped to hyperspace, Reed couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The Devourers were awakening, and humanity's chaotic minds might be the only thing standing between them and the consumption of all conscious life in the galaxy. The question was whether anyone would believe them in time to make a difference, and whether humanity's strange immunity would be enough to stop creatures that had already devoured entire galactic civilizations. Behind them, the ancient station continued its lonely vigil, its warnings echoing through empty corridors. The Devourers were coming, and the galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the greatest threats came from the spaces between stars, where hungry shadows waited for the seals to fail. The Coalition Council chamber on Nexus Station buzzed with the nervous energy of a dozen species, trying to process information that challenged everything they thought they knew about the universe. Reed stood at the center of the circular chamber, his human form dwarfed by the towering representatives of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. "Hi." Commander Veltoric's crystalline form reflected the chamber's lights as he spoke, his voice carrying the authority of millennia. "Captain Reed, you are asking us to believe that humanity, the weakest species in the Coalition, possesses the only defense against an enemy that has consumed entire galactic clusters. This is either delusion or desperation." Reed felt his jaw clench but kept his voice steady. "Commander, I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm presenting the evidence we gathered from the Architect Station. The recordings speak for themselves." The Veltar representative, a being of shifting energy, named Quantum Singer of Distant Stars, rippled with skepticism. "The data shows only that one creature retreated from one human. This proves nothing about a galactic threat." "The dimensional breach readings are clear," Reed insisted. "The seals are failing across dozens of systems. These scouts are just the beginning." Hive Mind Eternal Thought, speaking for the Drakmor Collective, responded with the unified voice of billions. "Even if this threat exists, why should we believe that human consciousness offers any advantage? Your species' mental chaos is a weakness, not a strength." Reed was about to respond when the chamber's emergency systems activated. Red lights bathed the assembled delegates as Admiral Kethver, the Coalition's military commander, materialized in the center of the room via hologram. The Korathi's usual composure was cracked, his multiple eyes wide with fear. "The Outer Rim colonies are under attack," Kethver announced without preamble. "Something is consuming entire populations. The Drakmor colony on Helix 7 went silent 6 hours ago. When we sent a patrol to investigate, they found the planet stripped of all conscious life." The chamber erupted in alarmed voices speaking dozens of languages. Reed felt a cold weight settle in his stomach as he realized his warnings had come too late. The Devourers were no longer scouts hiding in ancient stations. They were active, feeding, growing stronger with each world they consumed. "Show us," Veltoric commanded, his crystalline form darkening with stress. The hologram shifted to display the Helix 7 system. Where once a thriving world of 50 million drachmor had existed, now only silence remained. The planet itself was intact, but long-range sensors showed no signs of life. No energy signatures, no responses to communication attempts. The patrol ship that investigated was the DNV Thoughtpiercer, Kethver continued. A heavy cruiser with a crew of 10,000. They reported contact with unknown entities just before their transmissions ceased. When reinforcements arrived, they found the ship drifting in space, its crew gone. Reed stepped forward. Admiral, what happened to the crew? They're still aboard, Captain. But they're not the same. They've been changed into something else. Something that hunts their former comrades. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Devourers weren't just killing their victims. They were converting them, turning the galaxy's defenders into weapons against their own kind. Over the following weeks, the reports came in with increasing frequency. The Korathi fortress world of Crystal Haven fell to creatures that phased through their legendary energy shields as if they didn't exist. The Veltar-S phasing abilities offered no protection against enemies that existed partially outside normal space-time. The Drachmor's telepathic network, their greatest strength, became a highway for the Devourers to spread their influence across entire star systems. Each fallen world sent out the same final transmission, desperate warnings that something was coming, something that couldn't be fought with conventional weapons. Then silence, followed by the emergence of new creatures that had once been the defenders of those worlds. Reed watched the galaxy burn from the bridge of the Resilience, now stationed at the edge of human space. The Coalition's mighty fleets were in full retreat, their advanced technology and specialized abilities useless against an enemy that fed on consciousness itself. The species that had once mocked humanity's weakness now fled to human territory, seeking refuge in the one place. The Devourers seemed to avoid. Dr. Walsh worked around the clock with the refugees, studying survivors of Devourer attacks. Her findings confirmed what Red had begun to suspect. Humans weren't just resistant to the creature's feeding process. They were actively harmful to it. It's like we're poisonous to them, Walsh explained to Reed in her makeshift laboratory. Our chaotic thought patterns disrupt their feeding network. When they try to consume human consciousness, it's like introducing a virus into their system. The breakthrough came when Communications Officer Martinez volunteered for a dangerous experiment. Walsh had isolated the mental frequencies that seemed to disrupt Devourer feeding patterns, and Martinez had trained herself to broadcast them deliberately. I can feel them out there, Martinez reported during the first successful test. They're trying to coordinate their attacks on the refugee convoy, but every time I broadcast, their formation breaks down. They can't maintain their connection to each other. Reed realized they weren't just witnessing humanity's survival. They were watching the birth of a new kind of warfare, one where the weapon was consciousness itself. The turning point came when the Devourers launched their first major assault on human space. A swarm of 50 creatures, led by converted Korathi and Drachmor, attacked the human colony of New Geneva. The colonists, armed with nothing but mining equipment and desperate courage, should have been consumed within hours. Instead, they fought back with a ferocity that surprised even themselves. The miners used industrial lasers not just as weapons, but as focusing devices for their mental broadcasts. The colonists' natural human stubbornness, amplified by their determination to protect their families, created a wall of psychic static that the Devourers couldn't penetrate. When the battle was over, 3 Devourers had been not just repelled but actually destroyed. The converted creatures that had once been Coalition soldiers lay motionless, their consciousness somehow restored to its original state. The remaining Devourers retreated. Their formation in chaos, Reed received the battle report while standing in the Resilience's observation deck, watching refugee ships from a dozen species seeking shelter in human space. The irony wasn't lost on him. The species that had once been relegated to the galaxy's backwater regions were now the only safe haven for the most advanced civilizations in known space. Captain, Walsh said, joining him at the viewport, I've been analyzing the data. from New Geneva. The miners didn't just fight off the devourers. They actually reversed the conversion process on some of the creatures. They saved the consciousness of beings that had been consumed. Reed felt hope stirring for the first time in weeks. Are you saying we can fight back? More than that, Captain. I think we can win. The devourers have never encountered anything like human consciousness before. They don't know how to adapt to our chaos, but we're learning to weaponize it. As Reed watched the refugee ships docking at human stations, he realized that the galaxy was changing in ways no one had anticipated. The weak had become strong, not through evolution or technology, but through the recognition that their greatest flaw might be their greatest weapon. The devourers had awakened expecting to find a galaxy of ordered minds ready for consumption. Instead, they had found humanity, chaotic, emotional, and utterly unpredictable. The hunt was about to become a war, and for the first time in galactic history, the prey was learning to hunt back. Commander Ryan Torres studied the tactical display in the war room aboard the UES Defiance, humanity's newest and most advanced warship. The vessel hummed with hybrid technology, combining human ingenuity with salvaged alien systems that had been modified in ways their original creators never intended. Around the table sat the commanders of the first human battle fleet, their faces grim but determined. The devourer swarm is holding position at the edge of the Centauri system, Torres reported, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were planning. Intelligence suggests they're preparing for a major push toward the core worlds. If they succeed, the remaining coalition forces will be cut off from their supply lines. The holographic display showed a cluster of red dots representing the enemy. Formation: 50 devourers accompanied by twice that many converted beings from various species, all moving with the coordinated precision that had made them unstoppable against conventional forces. It was the largest concentration of enemy forces humanity had ever faced. Traditional tactics won't work, said Captain Maria Santos, commander of the UES Retribution. Their formation is too tight, their coordination too perfect? Any predictable. Attack pattern will be anticipated and countered. Torres nodded, his hand moving to activate a different display. Which is why we're not going to be predictable. We're going to do something no sane military commander would ever attempt. We're going to attack them with pure chaos. The plan that unfolded was madness by any conventional military standard. Instead of coordinated formations, human ships would attack in seemingly random patterns. Instead of following tactical doctrine, each captain would be free to make decisions based on instinct and emotion. Most importantly, the entire fleet would broadcast the mental static that had proven so effective against devourer coordination. Remember, Torres addressed his commanders, the moment we engage, you stop thinking like soldiers and start thinking like humans. Trust your instincts, not your training. Make decisions that don't make sense. Be unpredictable even to yourselves. The battle began 3 hours later when the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace directly into the enemy formation. The devourers, expecting a conventional approach, were caught completely off guard by the human suicidal-seeming tactics. The UES Courage, commanded by Captain David Kim, spiraled through the enemy formation in a pattern that defied physics and reason. His ship's weapons fired in directions that seemed random, but each shot was guided by Kim's intuitive understanding of where the devourers would be, not where they were. "This is insane," Kim muttered to himself as his ship performed maneuvers. That would have been impossible for any other species to execute. We're flying like we're drunk, and it's working. The devourers tried to adapt, but human unpredictability was beyond their experience. They had consumed civilizations that thought in logical patterns that could be predicted and countered. Humans, thought and emotions, instincts, and random leaps of logic that made no sense to creatures that fed on ordered consciousness. The breakthrough came when pilot Amy Chun, flying a single-seat fighter, found herself surrounded by 3 devourers. Instead of fleeing or fighting, she did something unprecedented. She opened her mind to them completely. "Come on," she whispered into her communicator as the creatures closed in. "You want to see what human consciousness like? Take a good Look. The devourers reached out with their feeding appendages, expecting to find the usual organized thought patterns they could consume. Instead, they encountered the full chaos of human consciousness. Chion's mind was a storm of memories, emotions, random thoughts, and contradictory impulses that existed simultaneously without resolution. The effect was immediate and devastating. The three devourers recoiled as if burned, their forms flickering and becoming unstable. Chion's naturally chaotic human consciousness had become a virus in their collective network, spreading confusion and something the creatures had never experienced before: fear. Did you see that? Chion's voice crackled over the communication channel. They're afraid. The devourers are actually afraid of us. The revelation spread through the human fleet like wildfire. Across the battle zone, human crews began opening their minds to the enemy, weaponizing their own consciousness against creatures that had never faced such a defense. The devourers' perfect coordination began to break down as human mental chaos infected their network. Captain Santos, aboard the Retribution, watched in amazement as enemy formations dissolved into confused individuals. All ships pressed the attack. They're losing coherence. What followed was less a battle than a rout. The devourers, for the first time in their existence across multiple galaxies, retreated in disorder. Their converted allies, cut off from the controlling influence, began to revert to their original selves. The first major human victory against the ancient enemy was complete. In the aftermath, the rescued coalition soldiers told stories that would reshape galactic understanding of the war. A Korathi captain, freed from devourer control, described the experience of being consumed. They mapped our thoughts instantly, the captain explained to Torres. Our crystalline minds process information in predictable patterns. We were like open books to them. But when they tried to process human consciousness, it was like trying to read a book where every page was written in a different language and the words kept changing. The victory at Centauri was just the beginning. Human forces, now confident in their unique abilities, began launching offensive operations against devourer strongholds throughout the galaxy. They developed new tactics based on their natural advantages: chaos as a weapon, unpredictability as armor, and human stubbornness as an unbreakable shield. Dr. Walsh, now serving as the fleet's chief research officer, worked with liberated coalition scientists to understand the full scope of humanity's advantage. We're not just immune to them, she reported to Torres. We're actively harmful to their entire species. Every time they try to feed on human consciousness, it damages their collective network. We're like a plague to them. The implications were staggering. Humanity had discovered that their perceived weakness was actually an evolutionary advantage against a threat that had consumed entire galactic civilizations. Their chaotic minds, emotional instability, and lack of specialized abilities had become the galaxy's greatest defense. As human fleets pushed deeper into enemy territory, they began to encounter something unprecedented: devourers in retreat. The creatures that had never known defeat were fleeing from an enemy they couldn't understand or consume. The ancient predators were learning, for the first time in their existence, what it meant to be prey. Torres stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching human ships patrol space that had been enemy territory just weeks before. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was at the center of that change. The species that had once been mocked as weak and chaotic were now the apex predators of known space. But in the depths of the galaxy, where the main devourer swarm still waited in their dimensional prisons, ancient consciousnesses stirred with something they had never felt before: the need to adapt or face extinction. The war was far from over, and humanity was about to discover that even apex predators could be challenged by prey that refused to accept their fate. The hunters had become the hunted, and the galaxy would never be the same. Admiral Alex Reed stood on the command deck of the UES Apex, humanity's flagship and the most powerful vessel ever constructed. 5 years had passed since the first encounter with the Devourers, and the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The ship around him represented that change, a massive hybrid of human innovation and alien technology. crewed by beings from dozens of species who had learned to fight alongside their former underlings. "Admiral, we're approaching the dimensional barrier," reported Captain Chun, the former pilot who had become one of humanity's most skilled consciousness warriors. "The fleet is in position for the final assault." Reed nodded, his eyes fixed on the swirling vortex of energy that marked the entrance to the Devourer home dimension. It had taken 3 years to locate this place, following the retreating enemy forces through layers of folded space-time to their ultimate stronghold. What they found there defied comprehension, a realm where the laws of physics bent to the will of consciousness itself. The assembled fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships formed the core, their crews trained in the art of weaponized chaos. Alongside them flew vessels crewed by the survivors of consumed worlds, beings who had learned to fight like humans, embracing disorder as a tactical advantage. The formation moved with controlled randomness, each ship following patterns that made sense only to the human mind. "Dr. Walsh, status report on the consciousness weapon," Reed commanded. Walsh, now bearing the scars of 5 years of war, looked up from her station. "The amplification arrays are online, Admiral. We've synchronized the mental broadcasts of every human in the fleet. When we activate the weapon, it will project the combined chaos of 50,000 human minds directly into the Devourer collective." Reed felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just a battle for territory or resources. It was a war for the very concept of consciousness itself. The Devourers had consumed entire galactic civilizations, but they had never faced anything like humanity's weaponized disorder. "All ships, prepare for dimensional entry," Reed announced to the fleet. "Remember, once we cross the barrier, normal physics don't apply. Trust your instincts, not your instruments. Fight like humans, not like soldiers." The fleet plunged into the dimensional barrier, reality warping around them as they entered a realm where thought and matter intermingled. The Devourer home dimension was a twisted reflection of normal space, filled with structures that existed in too many dimensions to comprehend. At its center lay the source of the creature's power, a massive consciousness that had been feeding on the dreams of entire species for millions of years. The battle began immediately. Devourers poured from the dimensional structures like a living tide, their forms more solid and terrifying than anything humanity had encountered before. These were not the scouts that had plagued the galaxy, but the ancient progenitors of the species, beings of pure consuming will that had learned to adapt to humanity's chaos. "They're different," Chun reported, her voice tight with concentration as she fought to maintain the mental barriers around her ship. "They're not retreating from our consciousness attacks. They're trying to feed on our chaos itself." Reed realized with growing alarm that the Devourers had learned. They had studied humanity's mental patterns and adapted their feeding process to consume disorder itself. The weapon that had made humanity supreme was now being turned against them. "All ships, fall back to defensive positions," Reed ordered, but even as he spoke, he knew retreat wasn't an option. The dimensional barrier had sealed behind them. This was a fight to the finish. The fleet found itself surrounded by creatures that fed on chaos itself, turning humanity's greatest strength into a weakness. Ships began to fall as their crews were consumed by Devourers that had learned to digest disorder. The carefully planned assault was becoming a massacre. Then something unexpected happened. Engineer Tom Bradley, aboard the damaged UES Resilience, made a discovery that would change everything. As his ship's systems failed and Devourers closed in, he noticed something in the patterns of their attack. "Admiral," Bradley's voice crackled over the communication system, "they're not actually consuming our chaos. They're trying to organize it. They're still thinking like Devourers, trying to make our disorder fit their feeding patterns." Reed felt understanding dawn. They're trying to force chaos into order. Exactly, but that's not how chaos works. The harder they try to control it, the more unstable it becomes. Walsh's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. "We've been fighting them wrong? We don't need to broadcast chaos at them. We need to broadcast pure, concentrated chaos into ourselves." The order went out across the fleet. "Stop trying to..." use chaos as a weapon, and instead become chaos itself. Human crews abandoned all pretense of military discipline and embraced their species' fundamental nature. They stopped thinking tactically and started thinking emotionally. They stopped following orders and started following instincts. The effect was immediate and devastating to the devourers. As human consciousness became truly chaotic, the creatures found themselves unable to process what they were trying to consume. Their attempts to organize human disorder created feedback loops that tore through their collective network like a virus. Captain Santos, her ship spiraling through impossible geometries, laughed with pure joy as she watched devourer formations collapse around her. "This is what we are," she shouted over the communication channel. "We're not soldiers or warriors. We're humans, and that's enough." The battle reached its climax when the human fleet, acting with perfect disorder, converged on the central consciousness that powered the devourer realm. Instead of attacking it directly, they did something the ancient entity could never have anticipated. They offered it a gift. Every human in the fleet opened their minds completely, presenting their consciousness to the devourer progenitor not as enemies, but as willing sacrifices. The entity, driven by millions of years of feeding instinct, reached out to consume them. What it received instead was the pure essence of humanity, love and hate existing simultaneously, logic and emotion intertwined, hope and despair dancing together in patterns that defied comprehension. The devourer consciousness, designed to consume order, tried to process this gift and found itself unraveling. The death scream of the devourer progenitor echoed across dimensions, carrying with it the dissolution of every creature connected to its network. Across the galaxy, the remaining devourers simply ceased to exist, their connection to the source of their power severed forever. In the aftermath, as the human fleet emerged from the collapsing dimension, Reed found himself commanding more than just humanity's forces. The surviving species of the galaxy looked to him for leadership, recognizing that the former underdogs had become something unprecedented. A species that had defeated an enemy that had consumed entire galactic civilizations. The reconstruction of galactic civilization began immediately, but it was a different galaxy now. Humanity didn't rule through conquest or dominance, but through the recognition that chaos and order could coexist. They taught other species to embrace their own forms of productive disorder, showing them that strength could come from accepting weakness. Dr. Walsh, now the galaxy's leading expert on consciousness, established research centers throughout human space where beings from all species could study the nature of awareness itself. The devourers saw consciousness as something to be consumed, she explained to a mixed gathering of scientists. We've learned to see it as something to be celebrated in all its forms. The Karafi learned to introduce controlled randomness into their crystalline thought patterns, making them more flexible and creative. The Veltar discovered that quantum uncertainty could be a source of strength rather than weakness. The Drakmor found that individual thoughts could enhance their collective network rather than threaten it. But perhaps the most significant change was in humanity itself. They had gone from being the galaxy's weakest species to its apex predator, not through evolution or technology, but through the simple recognition that their greatest flaw was actually their greatest gift. Reed, now in his 60s and bearing the title of Galactic Admiral, stood once again on the observation deck of his flagship. But instead of looking out at empty space, he watched a thriving galaxy where hundreds of species worked together, each contributing their unique perspective to the greater whole. "Sir," Captain Chun approached, now wearing the insignia of the Galactic Defense Force. "Long-range sensors are detecting something at the edge of the galaxy. It looks like another dimensional breach." Reed smiled, feeling the familiar thrill of the unknown. "Another threat?" "Unknown, sir. It could be anything." Reed nodded, his hand moving to the communication controls. "Alert the fleet. Looks like the galaxy needs its apex predators again." As the ships of the Galactic Defense Force moved toward the new threat, Reed reflected on how far they had all come. Humanity had been the underdog for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to be anything else. Now they were the apex predator, the species other civilizations looked to for protection and leadership. But more importantly, they had learned that being the apex predator didn't mean dominating others. It meant protecting them, guiding them, and showing them that strength could come from the most unexpected places. The galaxy was safer now, not because humanity had conquered it, but because they had taught it to conquer itself. The former underdogs had become legends, and the universe would never be the same.